All right, Trustee Church, can you hear us out there before I hit the gavel? All right, thumbs up. All right, it's 11:02 a.m. on Tuesday, August 22nd, 2023, and this is a work session of the Washoe County School District Board of Trustees. I would like to now invite Clerk Rodriguez for roll call.
Thank you, Madam President. Trustee Mayberry.
Good morning.
Vice President Nicolette.
Good morning.
Here, President Smith.
Here.
Trustee Westlake.
Good morning.
Trustee Woodley.
Here.
Trustee Church. Sue.
Here.
And Superintendent is not here at this time. Madam President, we have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, we have a guest with us who is with us meeting after meeting, year after year, board, committee, and so much more. Provides his knowledge, his passion, and his care to our district and to those that serve. And so, Mr. Pablo Navaduran, would you please lead us in today's pledge? Thank you very much, Mr. Navaduran. All right, and now I'll move on to our land acknowledgement. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in the hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We acknowledge that some of our educational structures are situated in the traditional homelands of the Washoe, Numu, Northern Paiute, Niwi, Western Shoshone, and Nuwu, Southern Paiute peoples. We pay respect to their elders past and present. These lands continue to be a gathering place for Indigenous peoples, and we recognize their deep connection to these places. We extend our appreciation for the opportunity to live and learn in their territory. Thank you. So that closes our first section of open items, and now we will move on to our items for presentation and discussion, which is the main reason for today's work session. So I'll go ahead and open item 2.01. This is the discussion, presentation to update the Board of Trustees on the progress, planned activities, and schedule of the district-wide Facilities Modernization Plan, also known publicly as the FMP. This is an item for information and discussion only. And we welcome our Chief Operating Officer, Adam Searcy, and then from Canon Design, Paul Mills. Thank you so much for being here. I know this is a conversation that we have been very excited to have after a lot of work on your part. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Just a brief introduction. It's great to be back, kind of kicking this back off in a sense. We've actually been at it for nearly a year now. Canon Design established partnership with the school district and laid the groundwork with extensive study last fall. And really, as you may recall, throughout the spring began very rigorous and earnest engagement with the community on what they're terming draft options for our facilities modernization plan. A plan that is founded in a sense of equity, efficiency, and community for all of our school facilities that we're really excited to develop in partnership with them and, of course, with our community. So, as you mentioned, this is an informational item, but I'll let Mr. Mills describe the nature of the content and, of course, the requests from the trustees. So, Mr. Mills, take it away.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you again. Today's objectives are pretty simple. We're going to give you an overview of the draft options, of which you have a very detailed report that accompany this deck. We're going to give you an overview and an opportunity for the community to hear what these draft options are about. These are going to be shared with your constituents over the next 6 to 8 weeks. in broad fashion. We have started engagements that went back into the spring, but we continue this dialogue, and there will be a heavy round of community engagements. And we felt it was appropriate to share where we stand with these draft options today. We also want to communicate publicly opportunities for the community to participate in this process, including a very important community survey number 2. Community survey number 1 helped us with the guiding principles, goals, and strategies, and informed the sort of preferences around trade-offs that helped us design draft options. Community survey number 2 is about specific schools and about different options, option A, B, C, D, about different schools, so that we can have conversations around these and hear from their communities their varying levels of support for these different options. And also, we want to give a little bit of a look ahead. We're going to be completing the work at the end of the calendar year, and I want to give you a sense of where this is heading beyond this point. So since we last presented to you, we've developed these draft options. We're working with, and to refresh your memory, with 2 different working groups that have supported this work. The District Planning Group, which is director-level operations and educational leadership from the district, as well as a stakeholder advisory group, which is a diverse group of students, parents, teachers, and school leadership and community members that have helped vet some of these options and give some guidance as we've gone through this. This is a group that is supporting us, that we recruited to help Canon Design provide a thoughtful input to you. So the image up on the left there is that cover page of the detail report, of which you have copies, and we're going to be referring to this. I'm not going to walk you through each and every area, every school, every option, but I'm going to speak to the different types of options categorically and give you those specific cases where they're relevant. We've also been engaged in community engagement. We had 4 regional conversations in April and May, and these were very intentional and focused, and the guidance of superintendent to make sure that we're starting early with conversations where there is potential change on the table among options. So we started that in April and May, and we continue that into the fall. We also had some new school tours over summer of 2023. We wanted to give the community the opportunity to see some of these new schools. You can see pictures of it and get it with your head, but it's nothing like walking through these facilities and understanding, when we use the term trade up, what we're talking about in terms of a facility. Also, we've been busy getting ready for this season of community engagements that are about to happen, starting next week. We've also been involved in updating the webpage for this process, where you can find all sundry sorts of information, the overview documents, all the data. We're real proud that the data dashboard is now live as part of this work, and I'm sorry I don't have the clicker to be able to walk you through it, but it's very interactive, and all the sorts of student information, enrollment projections, historical and projected, as well as the facility findings, as well as survey number 1, with all sorts of slicers to where we can see the different perspectives disaggregated by different geographies, different socioeconomic backgrounds, et cetera, and the different questions that helped inform these draft options. Also importantly on this, and it will be live on October, it's going to be 29th. Forgive me for putting 28 on the document here, but it's when we're launching our first of this new season of community engagements next Tuesday. And the district's website with links to all this information is washingtonschools.net/FEM facility modernization plan.
Mr. Mills, really quick. The awesome site that I see in that other slide, will that also go live on the 20th?
Yes,
The survey? Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. So let's get into the draft options. And two words very intentionally used, and we've had a bit of a mantra with different stakeholder groups. The word draft means no decisions already made. These are ideas that we're going through, and we want and value the input of all stakeholders, from parents to community members, staff, etc., to convey their perceptions and preferences in this process. Second word options means that there are choices, including status quo. Don't change anything, just improve the buildings. Is an option in all areas as well. So a few points about it. Developed with district stakeholders involved in our process. It's based on values and principles. Most central to it, which is that no dramatic changes without talking to the community and having candid conversation about it. One and two that it not be put forward unless there is a clear benefit for the students involved. We use the terms trade throughout this, and this is by virtue of the blessing that you have WC1 funding, so that there are capital solutions that can fuel operational educational solutions that we're contemplating for the facility modernization plan. It's data informed, not data driven. It's not an algorithm that answers all questions, but rather data informed. There is a lot of wisdom and art to the science as part of these options. And it's been shared at 4 communities so far, and as I mentioned, there will be 12 more coming up soon. The community survey again opens on 29th, forgive me, and it will stay open until right after fall break. We want everyone to have an opportunity to participate. It's open for a long time. Same questions, but people can choose which areas they weigh in on if they don't have familiarity or interest in some of the other areas of the county. And where this is heading is our professional recommendations to you as the Board of Trustees in November. In December, we'll have a draft hit, and then have a final presentation in December. So when we started this process, you might recall that we talked about on the table often conversations around where can this go. A facilities plan can be about strictly about mortar and just figuring out what's broken and go fix it, or where you have growth and build new schools or new capacity. However, we've been charged by you and by leadership of the district to consider futures that might be different than what is currently in place today. Right? So these sorts of outcomes are on the table. Put the number of schools potentially that could wind up in these different buckets of outcomes. Quickly go through it. New schools, general maintenance, or more deep investments in the facility, renovations, reconstruction, new programs, grade configuration, consolidation, or repurposing of facilities. Maybe a longer term view on reconstruction and consolidation. Continued study and engagement, or attendance rezoning, potentially on the table.
So, Mr. Mills, I just want to let you know, when I went through your presentation, I liked this slide in particular because it shows how many different possibilities are on the table. It's not just repurpose the schools, rebuild. There are a lot of different categories that we're considering, and I think that this slide nicely.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So again, without preconceived notions, options on the table, including change anything. We're going to walk through all these, and I'm going to speak to specific cases where they're relevant. So you know that you've had a lot of success building new schools and keeping up with growth in your growing communities. And that work doesn't. However, enrollment projections show that we're reaching a bit of a peak, after which there will be decline. And new schools that were already planned, currently in design, Spanish Springs is clearly on the table, as well as future forward new construction for a high school in North Valleys area, as well as an elementary in Verdi, with which there's conversations with developers in the area. Right now, not quite at the tipping point where these are immediate in need. However, we want to be responsive to the notion that these have been planned out there, and they are referenced in this document.
Mr. Mills, I would like to defer to Trustee Mayberry. He has a question.
Thank you, Madam President. I just apologize. On the previous slide, I noticed that closing's not on there. Is that an option?
It is. We use the term consolidation for closure by virtue of different programs merging onto single campuses. Great question. So new schools are on the table. However, there's only a few of them, and one of them is present. Two that are more future forward, with looking at the right trigger points with residential developments that would cause those to be of immediate need. So clearly you have a bunch of newer schools. You've had a very robust capital program. There's a dozen or more schools that are very new shape, and the WC1 funding is already spent for those, and it's really the rest of the community's turn. However, there's going to be a nod that there will be ongoing maintenance in these facilities. Even the ones that feel young are starting to have systems that allow. So we're going to be responsible and outlay that there's general maintenance on those sorts of facilities. And I'm going to name all the cases. You can see it in blue there, but these are your brand new raw that just opened, right? But Hug from last year, Brian, Keep, Hatch, Hers, Desert Skies, Polikitas, Sky Ranch, and Depoe, and on. Then we're getting into where the real bulk of investment for this facility modernization plan will be, and that's in the renovation and revitalization category. 30 plus, it could be many more, depending on the sorts of options that are at the end of the day recommended to you. But this is for your older schools. These are the ones we looked at all the data around facility assessment, benchmarking, not just the physical condition, but also the way they're designed and outfitted to responsibly suit the educational program. The sorts of things like you've experienced at Swope recently with the renovation and additions at that school is a great example of the type of investment, in-depth work that goes there, which goes beyond just a coat of paint, but gets into actually looking at the floor plans and creating better laid out facilities that are more akin to your current standards when you build a new school. Debbie Smith, also with its transformation that it's seen for the new Career Tech Academy, is another great example of that. But I've listed here the sorts of things to consider. Clearly, having a single point of entry is of just tantamount importance, making sure that health, safety, and security is upheld. But of course, the building system upgrades, the sorts of things that are in the responsible stewardship of the facility are necessary. Shade structure, something we've heard a lot about from your community. We do know, particularly in these warmer months, this can be something that's very helpful for the staff and students at the schools, as well as all the athletics and academic supports to bring up those spaces, not just in terms of how well they're outfitted in size, but also the proximity to each other, and that they be designed around flexible learning hubs like you have at your newer facilities, where you have the opportunity for interdisciplinary instruction to happen, a lot more teacher and student collaboration, as well as project-based learning. Library modernizations and clearly technology furniture is a great bang for the buck investment that we can do in these older facilities. These sorts of transformations are big, and to think that any sort of concession to only have a renovation is really a false sense. These are major investments like you've seen at the schools I've pointed out, but these really are going to be around your elementary and high schools. I'm not leaving out the middle schools, just that you've had a lot of new construction in middle schools, and there's a lot of other opportunities for maybe even replacing some of them that I'm going to get into in a moment. But your high schools in particular, starting with your older and least adequate facilities, are the ones that would stand for significant upgrades. So a couple of images just to convey. We've been studying repeatable solutions, right? You have a lot of prototypes. Here, the example here is what we call lovingly sheds. These are from the 50s, 60s, of which we have around 20 across the county. We've looked at different ways to breathe new life into these facilities. And actually, the way they're laid out, there's some exciting opportunities there where it might not necessarily be a complete knockdown, which means we can leave an as-new type outcome, but at much lower cost and bring to scale a lot of improvements for more students more broadly.
No, I would like to jump in there. So the Swope Middle School, so many people who have been at school for generations and whose children are there now particularly like the revitalization at Swope because it kept the heart of the school that they knew, but brought it into a modern educational environment. So I'm particularly excited that you're exploring options for that when and where it fits. And I see that Director Enfield would like to mention.
Thank you, President Smith. Just a quick question, Paul. You mentioned that there are some exciting possibilities with this particular model. Would it involve having to move the students out of the school temporarily, or could it be done while students are in?
It can be done either clearly you need to have some sort of swing space. And in a lot of areas you actually have a lot of surplus capacity, so there could be some ways to not have to spend money on temporary facilities. However, there might be some areas where it is necessary to have portables. Great question. And clearly, disruption in the education program and safety are absolutely necessary for this, and we're planning for that, and we'll budget for that in the plan. We've also looked at pinwheels. These are from the 80s, 90s, a little bit younger in generation, but they're starting to show their age. And actually, being younger, the layouts of them don't lend themselves wide as well that we like in the chief shed. However, there are some transformative outcomes for these facilities as well. I want to say there's upwards of 25 or more of these campuses across your portfolio as well.
Thank you, President Smith. Hi, Paul. This is exciting. On the sheet shed, I mean, from a safety standpoint, it's like three standalone buildings. So if something's happening, it's hard to get quick access to whatever's happening, whether it's someone's coming into the school that you want to keep out. So can you give us an idea how you would you be connecting them like under one roof so that it's one facility instead of three separate facilities that you're trying to protect and keep safe?
That's a great question, and architects love to field this sort of question. We've explored a lot of different options. We call it kind of a kit of parts. We looked at the front of the house with different kind of low, mid, high type interventions that can be done, as well as the back of the house where all the classrooms are. And it runs the gamut of minor to major, having those courtyard areas that are defined by the different wings are a wonderful opportunity for outdoor learning, perhaps even covered as part of it. So we've explored a lot of that. Great question. Right, so moving on a little more deeper investments beyond renovations are opportunities for reconstruction. This is for your oldest, least adequate facilities, and recent examples would be Hug, that was replaced but off-site, as you know, as well as O'Brien, where there were capacity drivers towards having a new construction outcome for it. One thing that we've really explored deeply in our options development was the notion that these sorts of investments can be a catalyst for new trade-up strategy options that we're going to explain in just a little bit. But here are the cases that are out there. One, Vaughan, has already been authorized by the board to proceed forward, and that's in deep stages of design and development for the replacement of that facility. Other cases specifically are Anderson, Sun Valley, Lemon Valley, Stead, and Wooster, that you've all been to these campuses and you're familiar with them. These are your oldest and of considerable need, and also there are dramatic opportunities with those sorts of reconstructions that can create whole new trade-up scenarios. Others include Pine, Trainer, Sparks Middle, Dilworth, Clayton. So mentioned earlier, the renovations were really about the elementaries and high schools. We're talking about replacements to continue the path that we've been on with new construction, as well as replacement of Vaughan, but looking at those middle schools, as well as the feeder elementary schools in those areas. So we have explored new programs as a trigger and catalyst and solution towards some of the capacity concerns. Now, this is not exhaustive by any stretch at all, but we have consulted with the DPG, which is director level leadership, to design some solutions, and we've listened to the stakeholder advisory committee, the students and parents, teachers, and community members, expressing desires to see things like newcomer centers and supports in communities that direly need additional services beyond what they have today. These sorts of things are kind of listed here of considerations. We do know that pre-K is one of the main pillars of your strategic plan, and we've honored that through this process, and we see that as potential outcomes with new programs. A very specific case you'll see in option C when you look at the high schools in North Valleys. There was a solution as one of the options to create a signature program at an alternate site, actually at Cold Springs Middle School, where there is surplus capacity today before the residential development finally comes into that area. So it is kind of a temporary stopgap solution that might last a number of years, but we're trying to explore ways to resolve crowding at North Valley's high school. So that's one of several options, but this is an example how new programs and educational solutions that aren't just necessarily a construction issue. Now, that sort of program would involve some construction to make sure it's accommodated in its space. So getting a little more deeper into operational changes that are on the table, we did explore grade reconfiguration. And for those listening or maybe watching this stream, we're talking about what grades go to what schools. You have almost a county-wide standard of pre-K through 5 in elementary schools, 6 through 8 in middle school, and 9 through 12 in high school. And other alternatives to that were explored through this process, and draft options are put out and presented to the community. I've listed those specific cases here, starting with Pine Middle School, which could be repurposed as an elementary school or could be a pre-K 8. Those are in options B and D, C and E. There's a lot of detail in the report we'd not get into for the presentation. However, you can see all those details. We've also explored Trainer Middle School, potentially as a K-8, that some of the stakeholders have lifted up. If we're going to have one, maybe we should have more than one so that there is some collaboration and sharing of resources and professional development and mutual support between different campuses, and that was a perspective lifted up. There was a much more dramatic notion of looking at the area between Trainer, Sparks, Dilworth, and looking at perhaps going into pre-K 8 throughout an entire region, which would mean a dramatic change. It would take a number of years and a lot of construction to facilitate those sorts of dramatic changes, but that's something that was lifted up by community members in some of our community meetings. We looked at North Valleys, and one of the scenarios was maybe a 9th grade center to relieve the North Valleys High School. Again, looking at some surplus capacity already in hand at the Cold Springs Middle School with the supports, necessary separation of age groups, et cetera, so it can be a school within a school. But that would, again, be more of a stopgap until time when the residential developments are such that you're ready for a new high school up in that area. Incline Village area, where you have a lot of declining enrollment year after year for some time, we did explore different options out there, and I'll explain in just a moment some of the scenarios that we've looked at for Incline. Then we get into Trustee Mayberry, you were asking about closures as part of this. So we use the term consolidation. It's really about merging programs in a trade-up fashion, and that surplus facilities would intentionally be repurposed for another educational or community type benefit, and not to be a blight in the neighborhoods. But this was put forward, and with stern guidance from leadership at the district, was to make sure that there are preconditions around any sort of consolidation or closure of schools, that it needs to have a clear trade-up benefit for affected students. It's not you're going to an older 1950s building that's a few blocks away. Guess what? We're closing that. You're going to have to go to another one that's just as old but even further away. Those sorts of outcomes are not on the table. Only where there is a clear trade-up in terms of improved facilities, improved programs, improved concentration of resources in a way that actually expands student opportunities are these very, very dramatic changes that, we understand schools are the heart of a community. They are hallowed ground where we met our friends and loved ones throughout life. They're where we discover who we are. And to not honor the past through acknowledging that fact is absolutely essential in this conversation. However, looking forward, where you have a different number of students, changing needs in certain communities, it is responsible to take stock of the circumstances and to look at opportunities for better outcomes for students by looking at designing a whole new future that can be a whole new hallowed ground and exciting new place. And clearly, another precondition, this doesn't just happen in a vacuum, that this is done in partnership with the community, with the appropriate amount of community engagement as part of it. Now, benefits, the sorts of things that are here, they're outlined on the thing, but I'd be remiss not to explain, hey, it sounds like you're closing schools, you're taking something away. No, this is about trade up. This is about better resourced programs. It's having the right scale so that you can offer a diverse middle school, high school type program, elementary schools with the sorts of intervention supports, student supports that are necessary in your communities, as well as better facilities for more students faster, meaning that your WC1 funds, instead of spending it on a lot of buildings that are half full, you can spend that money and concentrate in areas and have even better renovations in fewer buildings in a way that benefit more students faster. And then we have your assets, your buildings today that could be used for other purposes, whether it's for administrative functions, whether it's community supports, whether it's elder care, or even housing. There are opportunities for public-private partnership that can be brought to leverage the asset value that you have into more resources to bring into your capital program. All of this to say is this is a challenging issue to deal with, and we've explored around the county, and we've come up with a list of schools where there seems to be make the most sense, the right ingredients of schools that are in close proximity to each other with declining enrollment, underutilized facilities in old buildings with these sorts of trade-up opportunities. So these are the ones, among other options, including don't change anything, that are on the table. So I mentioned Pine before, Trainer and Sparks, Dilworth, and Clayton. It's these middle school communities that can be a catalyst for change and consolidation in a way that brings out excellence in the resources that you're concentrating in the schools. So at Pine and a number of elementary schools feeding into it have in options B, C, D, and E some opportunities for consolidations in what I'm calling the near to midterm. Trainer, Sparks, and Dilworth, that whole area that stretches in close proximity, they share boundaries with each other. And a number of the 15 elementary schools, we're saying about 2 or 3 within a time frame. And I want to give a sense of scale and time in just a minute with an example. Clayton Middle School as well. There are 4 elementary schools that feed it right now, and these schools are older and in need of reinvestment. There's an opportunity perhaps to rebuild 1 or 2 of them in a way that trades up opportunities for all the students in that area, as well as elementaries in the Vaughan and Worcester areas. Then when we have our little symbol here with
I'm sorry, Mr. Mills, I was totally engrossed. And my colleague, Vice President, Dr. Diane Nicolette, has a comment.
You bet. Thank you, President. Can you give me more detail, give us more detail as to option A? Because when I see consolidation, repurpose, I immediately look for incline, and I don't see it. And I remember on the previous slide it says study, option A. What exactly does that mean?
Absolutely. And I can either jump ahead and address your question now, or I will come to it in a minute if you will suspend. Fantastic. So similar to a place where we can identify specific schools that would speak to a very near-term sorts of outcome, we're talking about a number of years before a lot of this stuff takes place, because we're insisting on trade-up scenarios, which requires funding, designing, planning, implementing construction, and move-in of a new facility before any of this dramatic change would happen. That's a number of years. We can't do them all at once, so it's going to take some time. It would be irresponsible today to name specific schools when in 5 years, 8 years, 10 years down the road, the enrollment projections will have changed. And what we're recommending is that in many of these cases that we take a hold and wait, and we take care of clearly all of the critical necessary improvements, looking at the near term of furniture and technology and taking care of all the safety issues at the schools, however, not doing the deep renovation projects at a number of them, because we don't want to overspend in other areas. We want to do this in a strategic manner. Because we're not naming those specific schools, we kind of use this separate icon here, which could mean of a number of schools, a number of them would be rebuilt. A number of them would be repurposed. Some of them would be renovated as but we're not naming necessarily which schools wind up in which outcomes. But when we look at a specific example, this should bring some of it to light. Again, this looks at some of those areas that we spoke about before, but it's additional rounds of trade-up opportunities. So I'm going to bring to life what this looks like and some of the challenges associated with it. So what we're looking at here are the attendance boundaries of the elementary schools that feed up into Traynor and Sparks and Dilworth that are all in very close proximity to each other. Those circles there represent your elementary and middle school walk zones, right? 1.25 miles and 2.25 miles, I believe, is your standard for the walk zones. So you can see a lot of these schools are walkable within very close proximity. These were responsibly built at a point in time when there was a larger student attending body in that area, but enrollments have declined in that area, which creates these opportunities.
And we just wanted to let you know, and this was totally appropriate at the time, we're moving towards the 1 and 2 mile walk zones, just so you know. We're still working on that over the course of the next few months based on staffing, but just wanted you to know that we are evolving to the 2 and 1.
And you're actually refreshing my memory of something that has been shared by staff. I just forgot it. But
no, that's okay. When you likely when you created this and in your other conversations, this was accurate. This is a very recent vote that we did, maybe not 6 weeks ago.
But it still bears out. We have a lot of schools that are very old, that are under-enrolled, that are in very close proximity of each other, which creates opportunities, right? So if we're looking at those 3 schools, and we look at the enrollment projections in the area, we've got 3,800 plus elementary students and 1,500 plus middle school students. When you look at this being 3 middle schools, 12 elementary schools, you can see the range of school sizes. Students per school, 193 to 435 for elementary schools, right? That means, that translates to about maybe as high as 3 sections per grade, or maybe as small as 1 section per grade in the smallest of those schools. Capacity utilization, 64%. That's how full the building is or how well efficiently it's operated. At the middle school level, 393 at a middle school, up to 635 are the current projections out 5 years. That translates to 4 to 7 sections per grade at the middle school level at a capacity utilization of 62%. If we could wave a magic wand and design facilities for those students today and use your current standards like you're building out in the newer parts of the county, you would not design 3 middle schools and 12 elementary schools. At today's scale and standards, you would have 2 middle schools for this area and 6 elementary schools. And so hypothetically, if we built this today, we'd be talking about 8 schools instead of 15, with around 700 students at your elementaries, consistent with your newest facilities, and 1,400 students at the middle schools, which, as you can see here, looking at the map, projected 1572, we'd probably master plan those campuses a little smaller that could scale up or have some diversity and choice offerings, maybe one smaller, one larger. But this speaks to having 4 classes per grade at the elementary level, a lot more opportunity for density of resources to be able to concentrate on differentiation of instruction, and particularly at the middle school, having 12 sections per grade, where you can have a very diverse program offering with STEM offerings, with language offerings, with gifted and talented, all sorts of different things that you cannot afford when you have 4 to 7 sections per grade at the middle school level.
Dr. Nicholas?
Yes, thank you. I fully understand the density of resources, and I find that very exciting on many levels. My question is, what data do you incorporate when you talk about upsizing? So I'll just lay it out there. I don't always believe bigger is better. Again, I understand the density of resources. Talk to me about the data you use to balance density of resources with bigger can be better.
So we have used the prevailing education specifications, which is your design standards. That there was a process that happened prior to us joining the project that was underwent with a lot of input from community members, with educators, but that was to design the scale and standards for the types of spaces, the sorts of flexible hubs that are surrounded by all the classrooms, et cetera. That sort of design spec is something we took as the given for the extent of it. Typically in those processes, and I'm very confident that there was a lot of research involved in that development of standards. We didn't do that during the course of the FMP.
Is it fair to say, just to build off that the new approach that we've been taking, which we see with Jaywood Raw, with Bohatch, with Pulikitis, are all executing on that model now?
Yes.
Okay.
So I share all this to frame the challenges of the status quo and where enrollment projections are heading, which speaks to maybe there's an alternative future that's different. So I'm going to put things in a time scale and speak to a sequence of events here that can help define a trade-off. Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Trustee?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Madam President. Just back to that previous slide real quick. I do have a question. This might be more for superintendent. When I look at it, like going bigger, I just looking at these schools, like where it happens to the custodian staff, the principals, the deans of those schools, where are they going?
I'll take a shot at this. The next slide, actually putting it into that time scale dimension, is really helpful. Ultimately, there are vacancies all across the district. These scale of changes would occur with many, many years of advance notice and planning, and there would presumably be ample opportunity for adjustments and intentional job opportunities to come out into play. But you know, to the extent that the teachers follow the students, there will be potentially one fewer principal position, one fewer SFC position. It's about that transition period that we think the construction and planning time period will allow everyone impacted to adapt and adjust in a healthy way.
Okay. All right. I do just want to stay on the record that as we look to go bigger potentially, I just hate for anyone to be outgrown out of a job. So just want to put that on record.
Thank you. Would it be safe to say, though, we're cutting back on sites, but we're not really cutting back on square footage or students? We're just having bigger square footage, but the students are still there. So wouldn't that go to say that we still need the staff that was servicing these students in this school would probably need to go and serve the students that are going to the bigger site, because we wouldn't want to overload less staff and be bringing in more students. So would we really be losing staff? Maybe we'd have a principal and a couple of vice principals, and I would think that would be more effective, having one site and more qualified educators and administrators to service the needs of those students. So I don't think we should think about cutting staff, because we're still going to have the same amount of students. They're just, it's just geography. They're going somewhere else, but they still need the help and support of those staff members, right?
Yeah. And Trustee Westlake, and that's also a direction from this board. So right now we have to have all the different roles we have because we have all these schools that are open. In the model that we could potentially choose to move toward, based on budget and the value and the vision of the board, we can also relook at the teams and the roles that are now supporting. So right now the schools are all staffed in a way that's appropriate based on the number of our schools and the budget we have. But as we reimagine some of these spaces and the number of schools perhaps changes from that traditional comprehensive school perspective, we may have the opportunity to not, where today's equation could equal one principal and one dean, it may look like it could be a principal, an assistant principal, and a dean. Or rather than one counselor, there could be two counselors, and these are just all ideas. So as these ideas work themselves out and as we evaluate the budget, that could be something that this board evaluates in its values. And I will also mention that in the reimagining of some of these spaces, let's say there were a pre-K center that comes out of one of these ideas, that would still need to be staffed, there would still need to be facilities team members there, among other things. But absolutely, we could pay very close attention to making sure that we're providing that full support from all of those administrative roles that are in direct service to our students and families.
I just had one more. Also, what I'm thinking too, and tell me if I'm wrong, but we wouldn't have the overhead of all these buildings, and wouldn't it be better to put the money towards more staff to actually educate and serve our students than spending it on square footage?
I don't know. We'll see what Mr. Mills say. I would say we want to be careful with that because we want to make sure that what we have, these are also different funding sources. A lot of these projects would be WC1 money, which we don't use for instructional support, but I would say it's all heard. Yeah.
And I will say that there are opportunities with newer buildings to operate much more efficiently. Your energy costs of newer buildings are much, much lower than your older ones that you have. You have a lot of square feet that are empty at this point. A lot of these under-enrolled schools, you see the average capacity utilization 64%, 62% within this area within 5 years. That's a lot of square feet that you don't have, that you have to maintain and keep safe and operating well for students. You are correct. There are opportunities to economize and redirect that budget into educational program, into teachers, into supports for students. So let me bring this to life as one example, right? This is going to be conceptual, but really the intent here is to convey the sequence of steps it would take to cause one of these trade-ups to happen. So in this scenario, we're talking about 3 middle schools and 12 elementary schools. If one of those middle schools were to be redesigned, reconstructed, just like Vaughn is right now, like O'Brien was recently, or renovated in a way similar to Swope, that would take a number of years, even if we said go today, right? It would take a while to do. And I show a little bit of dotted lines there to convey that there is some flex in terms of how long these things are going to take at the end of the day, depending on a lot of circumstances. However, we're talking about a number of years to do that trade-up sort of scenario before we do anything with your portfolio. The next step would be that you would have that opportunity to consolidate middle schools. Now, you'd go from 3 to 2, and the hard line arrow there shows that more or less one school would move in with another, but however, there might be some redistricting, rezoning in the area conveyed by those dotted lines to show that there would be some balancing of where, which neighborhoods go where and which streets we do the zoning within. So that is 2027, just to kind of give a sense of time scale. That'll be the earliest, maybe even a year later if you're starting to go now. Now, if you fast-tracked the next project by designing it even before the other one is complete, then you might be able to do it this quickly, right? I'm showing step 3 here to take that empty now middle school and repurpose it as a new, up-to-standard 700-student elementary school. Whether it's start over, rebuild, some sort of adaptive reuse, reconstruction, a lot of different ways to design that, but to have a like-new situation with just to the same standards that you have in your other elementary schools, but now it's on a site where it used to be occupied by a middle school. Now we're looking at 2029, 2030. So we're starting to touch the next decade, right? Time scaling this, which would be, upon completion, an opportunity for a new elementary school to open at that site, which could be 2 or 3 elementary schools consolidated into one campus, some redistricting around the edges to balance out capacity utilization in that area. The next step would be suddenly you have 2 or 3 elementary sites that could be repurposed, could become a pre-K center, could become an educational support center, could become a community asset that could be used in different ways, or to generate revenue or bring new resources to the district. Now we're talking about 2031, 2032. Again, putting it to time scale. And then getting into now a little less specific, but now we can look at a whole new wave. We have these empty spaces that could be used as swing space. The question was asked earlier about how we would enact these things. If we have a whole school there that could act as a swing, will reward you with a better bid price. Those sorts of things can leverage into play the next wave of trade-up opportunities that could, over a long period of time, start to renew your facility portfolio in a way that redirects your operational resources to the benefit of student outcomes. So that was a long way to kind of convey, and there are a number of different options that are there that more or less use that kind of logic in your detailed reports, but I wanted to bring it to life so you can kind of understand what's at stake, the sorts of steps that can happen, and the amount of time that it would take. So Trustee Nicolette, you had asked a question earlier about incline. Incline's one of 3 geographies and areas where we're looking and exploring a scenario where, due to the unique circumstances of geographical remoteness, of declining enrollments, small school size, and unique cultural or community priorities that need to be thoughtfully planned, that's just going to take a little more time. So we're exploring a scenario in which we look at 2024 as this period of time to study those enrollments, make sure that we have a very firm understanding of where we have pre-K age students in these communities and how that affects long-term enrollments in the schools, to study the challenges associated with small size and scale, and to explore options thoughtfully through a process just like we're doing right now, but with a little more time. We've talked to some of these communities and we've heard from them, and we're honoring their input by suggesting there's a scenario with an extended planning time frame. Now, it's not that they're being left behind. What we're suggesting in this scenario is that we have placeholders in the FMP that will complete at the end of this calendar year, and placeholder budgets and placeholders in time frame based on priority criteria that we'll speak about in a moment, so that they're not left behind, but there is time to catch up in these areas. So these are incline, middle, elementary, middle, and high school. And that's put forward as option A, as a way to study that specific communities' schools. Natchez Elementary School, clearly in its geographical remoteness, with its natural feeder pattern that actually sends a lot of students out of district for high school or even middle school after completion at that school, it is a rich opportunity to really engage with the local community there, particularly with their very, very unique circumstances that need to be honored. And Trustee Smith, your words at the very beginning of this made me think of the Natchez community, make sure that we're doing this thing right, and I'm proud of the way we're putting forward this scenario. And of course, Gerlach, being a very, very, very small school, very remote, requires a very bespoke attention to what the priorities are up in that area. So in all 3 of these areas, we're exploring a single option, which is a bit more time to make sure, with placeholders, so that they're not left behind.
Trustee Church has a question on this.
Absolutely. Go for it, Trustee Church.
So number one, I'm trying to read what between the lines here. Nobody's suggesting that Natchez or Gerlach would close. Is that correct?
That's correct. You have students out there, and it would be irresponsible not to have schools.
And then Incline is on the table. Incline Middle School could be discussed.
Could be discussed.
And then along those same lines, Incline Middle School, you're there under option A, forming a local group, which would include Incline residents to study this down the road. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And we're going to, it's likely in our recommendations, we'll put some sort of time frame on it. So it's not just let's think about it, but rather a recommendation for some action that is time certain. We believe that a year's time frame would be a responsible time frame so that we're not putting off the benefits of WC1 funding that could benefit those communities as well.
Okay, and then a couple other quick comments. So number one, so I can tell my constituents at Incline, they would be included under this option in any discussion. Number two, I guess it's not under your charter, but it's not lost on me or on probably others that somewhere down the road we need to look at a new admin building, and so repurposing some of those could include that. So I noticed a number of them are 20 acres, 60 acres, et cetera. And then I have a question on Wooster, but I guess I'll hold that for later. So thank you very much for answering those.
Absolutely. So instead of walking through that very detailed report, I've just walked through the different outcomes and categories and cited those specific examples for each. Now I want to give a little bit of a look ahead of where we're going with this. So here we are in our timeline. We're kind of in the middle of our season of community conversations that I described earlier, and contemporaneous with that also is a community survey that's put out. So we have on this slide here a listing of the 4 conversations that we had in the spring, as well as a dozen more that are going to start next Tuesday. The survey is going to open on the 29th, and again, forgive us for the discrepancy of the date, but it'll launch intentionally on the first, the day of the first community forum, and that can on the 10th of October, which is shortly after you come back from fall break, which gives a long period of time for folks to educate themselves, to weigh in, attend some of these meetings, to explore the website, look at the documents, look through the dashboards and the data, and to take a survey that will have streamable videos so that they have the opportunity not just to read and look at a bunch of ideas or numbers on a page, but actually have it narrated in a way that's accessible and also with multilingual support. I will point out that the first 3 of the next meetings, which are all next week, are going to be county-wide in scale, meaning that all of the options for all the areas will be presented, some of them at the same time with breakout tables that will have opportunities to do a round robin where someone can go explore one area of the county in the next 15 minutes the next and move on their way and to satisfy their curiosities about what these different options are and what's at stake. After that first week, one of those will be virtual, and which will mimic the same design of the engagement, but it'll be done in a virtual environment with breakout rooms and all the multilingual supports, et cetera, as necessary. The ones after we're calling regional conversations are more focused, and we're not speaking at broad scale. However, if someone has questions about an area and they show up, clearly we'll take the time to address any of their questions they might have. But the real purpose and design of each of those regional conversations is to really dig deep and focus in their community so that it's accessible to them and to have the opportunity to spend a little bit more time among those. These are the ones that we started speaking to in the spring, as well as a couple of others where there are some trade-up opportunities or grade configuration changes and other opportunities that are a little different from today as an option, as a draft option to be considered. So a little look ahead. Okay, this is great. Paul, you come to me with a bunch of options that are drafted up, long report with a lot of detail outlining the benefits and challenges, relative costs, et cetera. Where does it go from here? Well, we're getting towards the end of the year is when we're going to provide your recommendations to you as a governing body with a draft presentation in November and then a final presentation on December 7th, where we'll outline in PowerPoint format all of the specific recommendations that will be put forward. That will be informed with all the data and, importantly, all the community input that we're going to be soliciting through this survey and meeting conversations. I'm sorry, did I say 7th? I meant 12th. We're touching the CFPC on the 7th. So what does it look like? Well, we're going to get a lot of information back. Preferences, maybe some polarized thoughts on different options. We're going to convene the district planning group. These are director level and above leadership of the district, as well as members from the stakeholder advisory group, which includes students and parents and community members, to weigh in on those survey results and help us come up with some consensus around what our recommendations are going to be. We're going to have to make a lot of hard decisions to make those recommendations, which in turn you as a governing body will have to make some hard decisions based on our recommendations to you. But those will be kind of in three areas. One, about the scope of projects, right? I like to kind of look at this is what and how much, right? We're going to be looking at things like different strategies, all schools warm, safe, secure, and dry. You can bank on that one being our recommendation, right? All schools to get up and closer to the current design standards certainly will be in the recommendations. Relieving crowding responsibly. It's great, we're getting over the hump with crowding, so we really get to refocus on your older schools. Positive impacts for lowest cost, so we're going to look at bang for buck, and those sorts of thoughts will go into how we scope and scale projects. The cost of repairing versus replacing. There's some industry standards out there where if the cost of, just kind of like my old 1982 Volvo, my favorite car ever, that after a certain point when the transmission goes, air conditioning goes, it's time for a new car, right? Well, there are some buildings that perhaps the cost of renovating just justify new construction. Then there's the notion of priority, and that's what order these projects will happen in. Now, there's no perfect algorithm that anyone in all their wisdom and experience and best intentions can design that can mathematically cede all control. There's an art and a science to it, but these are the sorts of criteria that would go into ascertaining what the priority order of which projects would happen when. And fundamentally, worst first, need-based priority, right? We talked about that in some previous presentations about the conditions and the designs of your schools. And that's measurable. Benefiting the most students possible clearly is an objective here. Other things equal, that's going to be a tiebreaker. But especially those facing opportunity barriers. We want to break down barriers so that we can elevate opportunities for all students countywide. Geographical equity also is of concern, so that all the investment over certain periods of time is done in a way where all communities are going to benefit from this reinvestment from WC1. Regional strategy logic. Some of those sequence of events for those trade-up scenarios will have a necessary logic to them to be able to create the steps in place to be able to reach the outcomes, as well as having swing space to facilitate, et cetera. So there might be some of that sort of strategy baked into when certain projects would be scheduled, as well as the sorts of benefits that come from trade-up and how we can accelerate those as soon as possible. These are the sorts of things that, just like when I came to you in December and shared with you the recommendation for replacing Vaughn, it was very data informed and looked at a lot of different benefits and was just a clear in a way obvious recommendation to make. Here we're going to use a similar sort of approach. Then when, right? What's the schedule going to be? Well, there's a lot of factors into that. You know, the safety of your students, having the right amount of swing space, reducing disruptions will affect the schedule at which these projects can take place. Your annual capital funding, while very generous and wonderful that you have that opportunity, is finite, and we can't do all projects all at once. So it's going to have to be a certain cash flow planning about this approach. And then there's the construction market itself, right, in terms of costs that we're getting bids at and the capacity of contractors that are here locally to be able to respond to this work. These sorts of things will be dictating when schedule will be. So there's a lot of thought that's going to come in, not only in terms of when we look at the options, the draft options, and turn those into recommendations of what the end state will be, but these sorts of projects will be scoped, prioritized, and scheduled with all these sorts of considerations. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't share with you that there probably will be people that are dissatisfied with some of the recommendations, right? Whether it's they don't like the disposition of some of the buildings, or it's not coming fast enough, my son's going to graduate before this happens. You can think of the sorts of things. This is a long journey, and we're in it for the best for all the students of Washoe County. We can't do it all at once. So there might be projects that go into, just like that timeline I was sharing, going into the next decade and beyond. These are the sorts of things that I want to brace you for as we start to plan ahead for what this looks like. So you're going to get PowerPoint version of it in December. We'll have a big, long, detailed report similar to the one I put forward for you with the options, but it'll outline or lay out the sorts of aspects of this. This is our parting gift, Christmas gift to you about the purpose and process, the results of the work, all the recommendations that we're providing, both in terms of capital investments, operational changes, policy even might be on the table, an implementation timeline, and that prioritized project list that's predictable, that gives you and your stakeholders the understanding of, okay, here's where I fit within the priorities that were laid out when the FMP was developed, as well as all the appendices and support data for it. But what this does is it marks kind of a whole new era. You've had a tremendously successful capital program. You've kept up with growth, and you're poised right now to really build on the promise of investments for equity and efficiency with the community. That's what the FMP is all about, and that's where this is heading.
Thank you very much. This is very exciting. A few thoughts with all of this. I think the consolidation is very exciting, and we should not shy away from this. Our community doesn't look the way it did 20, 30 years ago. I've been living here for about 22 years, but for people who have grown up here or lived here even longer, one consistent story I hear all the time is that Magic Carpet Golf was as far as really Reno went back in those days. And the same was true out in Sparks when we know McCarran to be a loop. It didn't used to always be a finished loop. And so that just goes to show where the entire volume was for this community back in the day versus where we are now. And I do understand, and I want to acknowledge that sometimes that population demographic changes can be difficult because it changes maybe where you grew up, where the community lives now. There's a lot to unpack with that, but it is not anything that we should shy away from. This is an important, positive opportunity, particularly in our urban core areas, which is really where I want to advocate for. I love the schools that we have been building in our areas of growing demographic growth, and we absolutely need to deliver on those educational environments for our children in established neighborhoods and in that urban core. So personally, I'm thrilled with the focus on those areas, and I look forward to seeing the developed plans. In addition to that, I also like the visual depictions, and I think that helps quite a bit. When I was spending time up with the Incline community and some of the other conversations I've had, one of the things that did come up, and this is my conversation with them, but I think this is applicable across the board, is that many people are very vision, so they can look at the school that maybe their parents went to, that they've been in, and then they can see new spaces and really get a feel for that. So I really like how you did the trips to the newer schools to also show people that, of course, there's some that can't make it to one of those schools because they don't have the transportation, but I think maximizing those visual depictions of what's popular, or possible, not popular, is really important. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is I did get the opportunity to review all of those different options, and I liked some of the community ideas that have come out. Of course, I'm not weighing in on one thing or another, but for example, there was the idea D and the pine idea, and I do think that we should be assertive in the evaluation of our buildings, how many we really need for comprehensive educational sites, and then prioritize what we could do and repurpose spaces, particularly in the areas of potentially dedicated pre-K educational sites, things like that. So I'm really excited to see what comes next with all of this work. Trustee Woodley.
Thank you, Madam President. So I just want to say thank you for this presentation. Thank you for bringing this to our attention and for our community as well. I was watching this presentation, I read through your pieces, and a phrase that kept coming to my mind, something that we don't talk about anymore, but there was a time when we were talking about dead malls, ghost malls, because communities didn't take the proactive approach of seeing what was coming. I like the multiple approaches that you're suggesting here for us with regards to our infrastructure. and where we are, and we're not just looking at building more schools. We have the funding, but I really like the idea of repurposing buildings and being creative with how we use the infrastructure we have, because I don't want to see us get to a point where we have schools with 20% occupancy, and then we're wondering, what do we do with these huge buildings? We didn't plan for it. So thank you for bringing that to us, because as you stated, we have to be responsible to take stock of what we have now and where our community is today. And it is a tough conversation, because sometimes we don't like change. But one thing I do know, and I think the rest of us know too, as much as we might not want to accept it or admit it, our demographics are changing. We have the county, the two cities, they're enhancing their senior services. We know that we have a growing retirement community. I take a look at a location such as my neighborhood, Somerset. There's a good 20% of Somerset that's senior living. So when we have, for example, residential development that's coming, we don't know if that development is going to be regular families. They might decide to make 20% of that development senior living as well. So we have to be ready for that. We have to be nimble to move things around so as our community changes. So I appreciate this presentation, and we are going to have some tough decisions to make, but we have to be realistic and we have to be responsible. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Madam President. Yeah, I was just talking to my colleague. This is a lot. This is a lot of stuff. It really is. It's just a lot to digest, and I applaud your efforts. I'm looking forward to learning more. And you know, there was a news report. I'm not suggesting to go down this path, but it's interesting. There was a news report I saw where a community closed some schools and actually converted those schools into housing. You know, so there, to Trustee Woodley's point, there's a lot of opportunities to repurpose some of these schools. I agree. I mean, the community is changing. I think what's most interesting to me that it's almost seems to some degree a risk, because we know we're growing, but what's our enrollment really going to look like? I mean, you know, how do we really pinpoint that with some degree of accuracy? And I'm anxious to learn more about that, about, you know, some of the formulas and data that we've executed. And I appreciate your comments too about the timeline, and that, you know, this isn't going to happen overnight. This is going to happen over several years, because there's a lot of, as you know, a lot of emotion involved at times with schools and you know, children going to schools of their parents and keeping that tradition, or maybe being disrupted during you know, midterm to their high school, and so, you know, to some degree, I'm not in a real rush to have a lot of this implemented. It's just my perspective, but certainly I'm anxious to really see what we can do to transform our facilities and really right size what we need for our community going forward. So this is tremendous work, and I mean, I have a lot of work to do on my end, so thank you.
Thank you. I concur. I have a lot of work to do too on my end. My question is, how are we involving our student voices?
It's a great question. We began this process actually convening at the Student Advisory Council or Committee, the SAC, that works with the superintendent and ELT. They've been informed about this, and actually we had a strategy meeting today about how we're going to leverage that body with this work really soon. We're also administering this survey that's going to be countywide. Anyone and everyone is invited to participate, but we're also working with staff on strategies to get the most that we can, particularly out of the high school students, but get their participation. You know, when we see the survey results, we expect to see a lot of student participation. Great question.
Thank you, President Smith. I have two, well, a comment and a question. I'm going to follow up on Trustee Vice President Nicolette, excuse me. Lots of titles. I think it's great that you're involving the SAC. Obviously, that's important. And I know that we have pretty well-established school designs, like a template, if you will, for the schools that we do that are working well. But each school community is unique. And so how are the students in the buildings engaged in the design to make sure that it reflects what may be unique to that particular community?
So I'll take this one. I think Vaughn Middle School is a good example of an adaptation of the prototype design that we first implemented at the O'Brien Middle School campus. Not only is it being modified in terms of floor plan to best fit on that piece of real estate, it's also being modified in terms of sort of the programmatic layout, so making sure that some of the functions within the building are adjacent to different spaces that are more, I guess, favored or of interest to that school community. And then lastly, engaging with the active student body or even the active administration to learn more about the needs of that community. With every project, of course, we learn more, but Vaughn is the next best example of exactly what you described. And I think we'll have even more opportunity to customize the design solution like what you're describing on some of our projects that maybe are renovations. Like Swope Middle School was a very unique solution that, relative to the needs of that community. If we enacted a project of a similar nature at, say, for example, Dilworth, which is of the same original floor plan, it might look significantly different than Swope for a variety of reasons. And that input comes from a lot of different places, including the student body.
I appreciate that. I think I'd love to see us be a little more deliberate in how we're engaging students and getting their voice, be it on the color design. Kids have a lot of opinions on their learning environment. And I think that there are some ways in which, especially given that this is now one of the goals in our strategic plan, I think engaging our student body in these conversations and letting them weigh in on what their school home, because school is a second home for a lot of our kids, what their school home looks like. So I'd like to explore that further with the team. The second thing that I want to say is to build on what President Smith said about the power of visuals. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I will never take WC1 for granted as a superintendent because I had to run bond campaigns in my former district, and it's harder to give people the visuals when you don't want to get out in front of the voters and tell them exactly what you're going to do until they vote for you to do what I'm saying. But one of the things that we did do is that we were able to incorporate planning for the next bond into the current bond, if that makes sense. And we were able to create visuals so that people could see where their bond dollars were going to go. And so I just want to emphasize the power of that. People being able to see it really, really matters. So I'm glad that we could make that happen, and I just want to agree with that.
Thank you, Madam President.
Church has a question.
Sure, Trustee Church. We'll go right after Clerk Rodriguez. We'll go to you.
Thanks for all this work. I know it's been a lot of community involvement. I had the pleasure of actually getting to attend some of these. But I do kind of want to, looking at slide 33, the community outreach, what work has been done like with Natchez and Gerlach? Because I know I haven't been out there, especially like Natchez. I mean, they got part of a sidewalk that's beautiful, then like half of it looks like it's been mortared. So I just kind of want to, as we look to decades, down the line, what is it looking, or what community input has there been from like the Pyramid Lake Reservation and the Gerlach community?
It hasn't been sufficient to complete it in the time frame that we've got here. Straight talk here. These communities definitely deserve a very custom approach towards it in light of their cultures and everything that's very unique about them. And while we invited participants to be from all different geographies to be part of our stakeholder advisory group, we didn't have the benefit of every single community to be represented from it. So we do have some spots there that need a lot more bespoke touch. And in those areas where clearly we're not closing schools, as someone pointed out earlier, unlikely we're going to build another school in those areas. It's more about how do we evolve and adapt and transform their existing facilities or replace them as necessary for the long haul. And working through those sorts of pre-design sorts of conversations are what needs to happen during the course of the next year.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Well, thank you. This is just really overwhelmingly great news. We're so incredibly lucky that our community voted in 2016 for WC1, which really creates the opportunity to make all of this happen. Trustee Church, I see your hand up there.
Thank you. We can't be experts on all of this, but hopefully we have a good understanding. I know we're not deliberating, so I'm just going to kind of throw out some thoughts that I've made notes on. I do really like the idea of looking at those consolidations. In other words, potentially closing some schools, making new ones, refurbished ones much more efficient. To use another term, another trustee said, it maximizes the use. That means bus drivers, security, maintenance, et cetera. So I really like that idea. I like the idea of having stakeholder groups that represent the community, such as Incline Village Middle School. I'll tell you right now, because of the remoteness, closing it, in my opinion, is a non-starter, but I like the idea of a focus group involving community members. I also like what I just heard, I think, from Trustee Mayberry about housing. I'm assuming that means staff housing. I've been beating that drum for a long time, and I'm very, very supportive of that. Again, I don't think the admin building is on the table, but I think we have to look at that in terms of when we think, well, what are we going to do if we close Pine or something? And I'll say right off the bat, one thing to maybe look at, Wooster would be just a wonderful location for an admin building right off the freeway. Would be wonderful for an admin building if perhaps Wooster was moved to Pine or somewhere else. So I'm just throwing that out there. But overall, great presentation, so many issues. And I think my bottom line, as much as I try to wrap my head around this, is down the line after all these meetings are done, I'm going to rely heavily on the staff final recommendations. Hopefully we'll get 2 or 3 definitive recommendations from staff, but they're the experts. This is one matter that I really feel that staff input's essential, and I think that covers it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Trustee Westlake.
Thank you, President Smith. I just wanted to throw out there, are you guys looking at, I'm not sure about the facilities for teachers at Natchez or up at Incline, but out at Gerlach, I know there's quite a few teachers that commute from Reno Sparks, and they stay out there because they're on I think a 4-day week or a 3-day week, and then they come back to their housing where they actually live. And out in Gerlach, and speaking to the new principal there, Principal Stacy, there's just a couple of modulars, and there's teachers that would want to go out there and teach, but there's no housing facilities because it's all spread out ranches. There's no apartment buildings or condos or townhouses. So in these remote areas, are we planning on having some modulars out there for the traveling teachers that are willing to travel and stay out there and teach our kids?
I appreciate you lifting that up. Absolutely. That needs to be on the table for those remote areas. I've worked in entire states. We've done plans like in Hawaii where you're not only remote, you're on an island. And there's a lot of cases where housing, and there's solutions there that can help you accommodate and serve those students.
I would just like to echo that. That is something that is a concern.
Well, thanks, everyone. So the common theme that I've heard through my colleagues' comments from this presentation is that these buildings in the Washoe County School District is of service to our community. And so even in acknowledging the change and the growth and the evolution that we have the potential to maximize, our buildings, these locations, will still remain in service to our community. And we are actually showing our families and our students and our team the different ways that we can be of service to them through these buildings. And Vaughn is a great example of their new Family Resource Center that they're going to have in addition to other things. And that to me is really the prevailing theme to all of this, is how the Washoe County School District can be of service to our community in the way that our community is now and continues to grow. And I'm so very excited to see what you come back with next after this next series of community conversations. Thank you. All right. Oh, did you want to?
If I could just make a plug, and actually I forgot to give you my ask, and that is inform yourself of all the details of this sort of thing, but also please, with your constituents and friends and loved ones, please ask them to please participate, and at the very least, if they're unable to come to any of the meetings, that they look at the survey.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you so much, Mr. Mills and Mr. Searcy as well. So that, thank you. So that closes item 2.01 and brings us to our section 3 and item 3.01, which is our closing public comment. JJ, do we have any closing public comment?
Pablo Nava Duran.
Hi, Mr. Nava Duran.
Hello, guys. So I want to say thank you, Paul Mill and Adam Stacy, for presenting FIP presentation. So, what are the most important things about the more question about the doors, sparks, and trainer vocal? So, if you build like 2 middle schools, so I see like option A, leave it as is. Option B, build a new trainer middle school. Option 3, new spark middle school. B and C, trainer spark combined. Option D, build at spark middle school site with Delaware sparks combined. And then E is a regional configuration for K-8. So my bigger question is, why not build like maybe new Delaware's in trainer middle school and then have them split up for Sparks middle school and make them new elementary school for Sparks? So I saw the graph say like if we build today, we have 2 middle school and 6 elementary schools. So, so it's so complicated. And then for Pine, I'm gonna leave a question for later. So and then for Wooster and Vaughn in the Fear School, elementary school, I know many elementary schools need to have a new elementary school there, so but they have no land there, so I'm not sure what the solution is. Maybe if we build a new Pine elementary school or consolidate to the Pine elementary school, maybe try to bring up those area some points of Wooster Vaughn vocal, maybe moving them to a Pine elementary school while there's school, maybe lower Corby might grow, maybe try to build a new elementary school, and after openings. So that's my idea. So here we go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Navadran.
That's all I have for this item.
All right. Thank you. All right. So that closes item 3.01 and brings us to 3.02, which is adjourning the meeting. So at 12:30 on the dot. Thank you all so very much.
Trustee Woodward, you're in my seat.